Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. This is a novel position for me because normally, given the topic that I'm talking on, strategic implications, I start the talks and everyone else follows, so the legal implications and the symptoms follow my strategic talk. Also, if there are other talks, I've normally understood what people have said. I now find myself coming after two speakers, neither of which I've understood a word of what they've said. This opens up the potential for me to completely contradict everything they've said. So it could make for a very interesting question time. So I hope to leave some time at the end. I understand I've been given 40 minutes. Well, I hope I don't trouble the time then. I hope I leave some time at the end for questions, because I think the questions are certainly where I learn an awful lot, and maybe we can all share our knowledge or ignorance. I'm talking about the strategic implications and use of cyberspace, and I just want to say at the start that this is, in essence, the answer to this question is that the uses of cyberspace are total. They, in an information age, in an age where we're all based on knowledge-based economies, cyberspace is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And therefore, I don't actually like talking about cyberspace. What I really think we should be talking about is living in the digital age. Because the implications and the responsibilities and the consequences of living in a digital age affect all of us. And one of the troubles with that word cyber is that if you mention it to your average person in the street, they will think it's something technical, they'll think it's something for the IT department, they'll think fundamentally it's not their problem. Actually, the theme of my talk today is that it is their problem. It is everybody's problem. Now, you'll have heard, I've understood that there have been two profiles of me announced to you all. I haven't a clue what either of them said, but I hope that they gave the impression that stood before you today is not a technologist, I'm not a signaller, I'm someone who's spent 30 years doing effects. I've been a paratrooper for 30 years, a counter-terrorist expert. I've been out there commanding operations in the field, delivering effect. And it's that focus on effect that has been the focus of my life. Indeed, I was so surprised when I got given this job in my last incarnation in the military to be in charge of defense cyber. I said to my wife, I said, darling, did you ever in your wildest dreams imagine that you'd be married to the head of defense cyber? And she said to me, she said, darling, I hate to disappoint you, but you don't appear in my wildest dreams. My daughter, my 10-year-old daughter was equally rude. She said, Daddy, what do you do every day? I said, I go around and I talk to people about computers. But she said, you're useless at computers. And I am useless at computers, as I think I just displayed trying to set this thing up. I'm absolutely hopeless at computers. But my focus is on the effects you achieve via computers, the effects that, and keeping a focus on that. And as I say, because we live in the information age, because that's where and certainly in Britain, knowledge-based economy, it seems to me, therefore, that this whole topic of cyberspace and the implications of cyberspace needs to be lifted out of the IT departments and placed squarely at the board level. This is chairman, CEO level business. And that's a real message that people need to take back, and it's one that I've repeatedly banged the drum at. Unfortunately, to conferences that tend to be stuffed with people from IT departments and technical specialists. But the message needs to get up to boardrooms. This is board level stuff. As you'll see when you come to the implications later on, the decisions that need to be taken about how we operate in cyberspace can only be taken at board level. And indeed, as a general comment, having worked at the heart of government for this for some 15 months now, I would say that there is far more technology out there, far more possibilities out there in cyberspace than we have the policy clearance to enact. And the real roadblock on progress in cyberspace is at the policy level. And that's because the instinct of people who don't understand cyberspace is to relegate this to the IT departments and the technical specialists. This is general stuff. If we're going to exploit the opportunities in cyberspace, this must be board level business. So please send that message back to wherever you're coming from. Okay, always start with a definition of cyberspace. I hope this doesn't contradict too much of what previous speakers have said. That is contentious. It has no authority other than that we in defence decided that's what we thought it was. Because wherever you go in the world and whichever sector within the British government you talk to, they all define cyberspace differently. In simple terms, I see cyberspace as the space between, the man-made space between networked computers. And I think that's quite a useful way of defining it, because what it does is it puts the emphasis on the fact that this is a medium through which you achieve effect. What is important is not the technology, it's the effects you achieve through it. And I think that's really, really important to keep that focus. We can get just obsessed with the technology, and actually it's the effects that people achieve through cyberspace that I think is important. And if you define cyberspace in this way, then you quickly become apparent that this is merely the latest exploitation by mankind of the electromagnetic spectrum. It's the latest turn of the handle. And if you see it that way, then you can see that cyberspace is more evolutionary rather than simply revolutionary, which is the way it tends to be taken. It tends to be taken as something completely new. I would contend if you look at the effects, it isn't completely new, that it's actually evolutionary. Now, in the military world, we see this, we've defined this as a domain along with land, sea and air. What do we mean by that? Well, in the military domain, what we'd say is that hitherto we've always tried to achieve our military effects either by land or sea or air or by a combination of them all. And now we need to consider how we do things through cyberspace as well. So it's another set of golf clubs in the golf bag of capability that we in defence need to have. And when you put it that way, you say, well, this isn't completely new. Let's take an example. 1968, Prague Spring, Dubček trying to liberate Czechoslovakia from the Soviet rule or way of doing things. And the Soviets decided to invade. What they did was they used electronic warfare to blanket out NATO's observation of what was going on, to provide the sort of the information blackout so that they could roll their tanks into Prague without much interference and without anyone noticing. Roll the clock forward, 2008, when the Russians went into Georgia. They did the same thing. They distorted the information package, they distorted the global picture, they distorted the picture for the Georgian defenders, distorting the information picture so that they could then roll the tanks in all the easier. Instead of using electronic warfare, they used cyber technology this time. In other words, same effects, but they just rolled on the technology. And if you're a really smart guy and want to make really smart investments, you'd be trying to look for what the next technological leap is beyond cyberspace, because there will be another one. We are already seeing reactions to how we operate in cyberspace. There was a very clever guy, a British military historian, theoretician in the 1930s with the extraordinary name of General Boney Fuller. Very clever man despite his name. And he came up with this theory from his experiences in World War I. He called it the constant tactical factor. And basically his theory was that every technological advantage, particularly the ones that seem to be earth-shatteringly life-changing, actually have a very limited time of dominance, because what they do is they prompt their reaction, whether in behaviours or whether in technologies that respond to that new technology. So it's a constantly sort of Hegelian process of progress in technology. The last time I was operating in the field, 2007 in Basra in Iraq, the hot technology then that was battle winning was mobile phone intercepts and geolocation of mobile phones. This was the one that was zapping terrorists. We could really get people with this. This was going to change the shape of battle forever. Wind the clock forward 5 years now to Afghanistan, and people don't really talk about that because technology's moved on and we're really interested now in computer network attack, but also human behaviours have moved on and the opposition stopped using mobile phones. So, a technological, a behavioural response, and we should expect that in cyberspace, this new kid on the block actually will generate its own response, both in human behaviours and in technological move-ons. People say, we'll talk later about cyberspace, how it's fundamentally insecure. Actually, if you're a real wizard, you'd be trying to devise a fundamentally secure internet. And there could be some good money on that if you can devise such a thing, starting right again from the basis. Instead of trying to retrofit security onto the internet, actually starting a completely new type of internet that is fundamentally secure. If you could find that holy grail, you might make quite a lot of money. So there we are. Cyberspace seen as a domain alongside land, sea and air, a medium through which to achieve effect. There is technology as a driver for productivity, communication, economic growth. In Britain, cyberspace is seen as the real opportunity whereby Britain, which has a fundamentally information-based, knowledge-based economy, can dig itself out of the economic mess it's in at the moment. So the focus of cyberspace, of cyber activity in Britain at the moment is all about economic stuff. So it's not about military stuff at all. We in the military have found ourselves very much on the back foot. It's all about economics. And the influence of social networking, there it is, reaction against, that's the political influence. Just saying that, we need to recognise that the cyberspace, some people describe as the fourth revolution in information. First being language, second being the invention of writing, third one the printing press, and the fourth one this cyber. All of those moves have actually been in some sense politically subversive because they've speeded up the flow of information, which governments as a habit try and control. The difference between the interesting thing about the printing press was that while it was politically subversive, at a human level, it was not particularly threatening. It took something like 200 years for the impact of the printing press to be fully felt across all societies. So it was a slow evolution at a human pace. One of the things that's particularly threatening, I think, and unsettling to society and individuals about the cyber revolution is that developments are taking place in cyberspace that are happening at a speed at which we human beings are finding it very hard to adapt. Talking to this audience of IT people, I understand there's a lot of people in the IT community here, you perhaps are right at the cutting edge, but I suspect even you sometimes struggle to keep up with what's going on in cyberspace. But this technology is happening so fast, and the implications we'll talk about in a minute are happening that are so profound that they're somehow they are humanly threatening and certainly humanly unsettling, as well, of course, as the political challenge which we've already sort of spoken about. That line there about cyberspace being global and unrestricted, that's a highly charged political statement, actually. In Britain, we like to think of it as global and unrestricted, and that's our political aspiration. But that's a contentious statement, because go to different parts of the world and you'll find that different people will challenge that. The Russians and Chinese, for instance, hotly contest that line. They say that their cyberspace must be their own. They're all in favour of carving up cyberspace into local political national areas. This is the point of the big conferences that the United Kingdom organised in November last year in London. It's happening again, the next series of talks, the talks in Budapest this November, and a year after that in Seoul. The topic of those conversations, of those conferences, is how to create norms of behaviour in cyberspace. And this is part of the international community trying to work out how to regulate or not, how to operate in cyberspace. So that statement there is actually hugely politically contentious. More contentious than we might imagine. These things are often seen in binary terms, but actually, you know, with the sort of the liberal West on one side and other countries to the other side. But funnily enough, even every country actually is going to decide where they stand, a different place on the spectrum. Britain, for instance, does not stand in the same place as America and Sweden, which I think are right over on the extreme libertarian end. Britain restricts practices in cyberspace in a way that you can't do in America. Interesting. What that illustrates is that every country needs to make up its own mind politically where it wants to draw the cursor on what is legitimate behaviour in cyberspace. To take another example, In Britain, we ban child pornography on the internet. In China, they want to ban all pornography on the internet. So sometimes these differences between nations that the newspapers would have us believe are really major differences are actually just differences in degree about what every society feels comfortable with. And I think that's an interesting point about the cyberspace. We are unbalanced in our reaction to what's going on in cyberspace, and the politicians need to really get a grip of cyberspace and make some key policy decisions about how we're going to operate. But again, I come back to my start point. What's important is not the fact that we're talking about cyberspace. What's important is the fact that we're talking about, in that example I just gave, pornography. And that's a political decision irrelevant to the fact it's through cyberspace. And the final comment, low entry-level cost. We have all become dependent on cyberspace, so we have huge vulnerabilities. What makes this particularly concerning from a security point of view is that compared to other threats around the world, the cost of playing around and exploiting those vulnerabilities that we all have now is very low. Low entry-level cost both in resource terms and in technology terms. Anyone armed with a computer and access to the internet can play around there to their heart's content and do mischief if they want, or do good if they want. It's up to them. But that low entry-level cost really opens the floodgates for people to mess around and cause mischief in cyberspace, which, for everyone concerned with cybersecurity, poses an interesting challenge. Now, the internet about people. Interesting couple of slides. Don't worry if you can't read the figures, I'll read them out to you. The important thing here is to look, if you look at the slide on the left, it's talking about who is using the internet. Why is that important? It's important because one of the worries we have as government is governments like to feel in control, companies like to feel in control. But actually, the people who are controlling the use of cyberspace are the users. They are coming up with exploitations and uses of the technology that the people who invented the technology probably never thought of. So this thing is not really, the development of cyberspace is not really being controlled by anyone. If it's being controlled by a group of people, it's really being controlled by the users who are driving it on. Who are the users? Well, there's 41% of the internet users are in Asia, and I suspect these figures are a bit old, which is just about the same as the combination of Europe and America, which is roughly about 40% as well. But watch out. The slide on the right, what that shows is that whereas penetration levels in America, somewhere up 70%, in Europe, somewhere about 50%, so pretty high penetration levels. But watch out, down there, Asia, 17%. As that penetration level in Asia grows and grows, as it will, that figure here on this side, percentage usage, is going to start swinging around. I suspect it's well over 50%, 60% by now. What that means is that people driving the internet are not going to be us. We like to think of the internet as a Western thing that the rest of the world's adopted. This is going to be out of our control pretty soon. It's going to be run from the Far East, from Asia. And we just better get used to that. We've got to ride this tiger, okay? That's quite an interesting dynamic. It's going to be driven by the users, and that's not going to be us in the West. The other interesting thing, this is actually more about bits of kit that people are using. There are two lines here. The top line in green is your desktop computers. And I'm going to make a gross generalization here and say that desktop computers are the ones you use when you go to work, and they're the ones that sit on your desk. And the bottom line, which as you can see is going to overtake, this slide's out of date, that blue line should move along a bit in 2012, but we're getting closer to that intersection line. What's happening is that numbers of them of these desktops are being overtaken by the personal ones, and we've all got them. We've all got our iPhones and our Samsung, whatever they are, Galaxy tablets, things. So what? Well, it seems to me as a gross generalization, but one that's nonetheless, I think, important, is that whereas the desktop computer that you use when you go to work, that you find in your desktop, the responsibility for the security of that pretty much sits with the company. The company will do the contract with the IT firm, they will set the patching, they will set the passwords and make you change them every 3 months. So security there is imposed on you as an individual, but it's the corporation that takes the responsibility for your communication system and your contract. However, increasingly what we're all going to use is these individual, portable, personal computers, for which the responsibility for the security on them rests with us as individuals. And that's a shift in responsibility that I'm not sure as a society we've really taken hold of yet. But I think that's really going to be important. When we talk at the end about what we can do about cybersecurity, and there's some general ideas, that idea of personal responsibility for their own behaviour in cyberspace is something that, to me, is a major behavioural change that needs to happen across society. And I think we're some way off that yet. Internet things. If you want to get spooked by the internet and what's happening in cyberspace, this is where it gets rather spooky, because there are more devices out there than people, and they're all talking to each other. And that's potentially quite worrying if you're concerned about what it is to be human in the world. How much responsibility for our lives do we want to delegate to machines? Is it too late? Have we already done it? People will come up with loads of arguments why it's financially sensible to delegate all kinds of things, and we already do it, to computers, to cyber technology, to machines talking to each other without us getting involved. How easy, what a placid life, we can all forget about it. Let the machines have responsibility. When you link that to biotechnology, I start to get really worried by that, actually. Implants in bodies of digital things connected to your medical records in the doctor's health studio, linked perhaps to an insurance company, and suddenly you find that what it is to be human, you are just a machine in someone else's financial calculations. There are all kinds of implications out there. I come back to my point. This cannot be left to the IT department. This must be taken seriously. The implications, the effects you achieve by cyberspace must be taken seriously by the policy people. It may be too late. We may have delegated already so much responsibility to machines, but we need to acknowledge that, and we need to work out what the implications are. Because certainly in the British context, we have delegated so much there, I'm not sure we've got a reversionary mode. So we better make sure that our security is pretty top-notch. We shall see. We shall see. The final comment about that, I'd say, is that there really is something interesting about humans and machines. It seems to me that human beings, and what makes human beings interesting, is that they're fundamentally analog. They deal in shades of grey, in sort of nuances. That's what's interesting about being a human being. And we've been like that throughout history. The digital world is fundamentally binary. It's on-off, it's ones and zeros, it's on or off, it's left or right, it's up or down. There are no shades of grey there. It's a very unnuanced world. And people are already saying, neuroscientists are observing that people who spend an awful lot of time dealing with computers, kids particularly, it is affecting the way their brains are working. I think that's quite an interesting and concerning thought. And we just need to take it seriously, because the implications are obvious. I go back to what I said at the start. This potentially affects what it is to be human. And I find this a curious time, that at the moment that we're all embracing this technology and spending more and more time in this digital world, at the same time, if you read any management journal, they're all talking about how logic is not enough. We all need to be much more emotional intelligence. Well, emotional intelligence goes one way. Becoming a digital binary person goes completely different. So this is a challenge for society on this one. Interesting. Okay, why is it important? Well, it's important for these wonderful reasons on the left. These are the ones we realised first, the opportunities. Transparency, faster communications, economic prosperity, innovation, freedom of expression, all great political things, economic things, marvellous. We've all leapt aboard that. Economic cheapness is the thing. In Britain, for instance, we've already decided, we made our planning for personnel in the Department of Pensions and Works and Pensions. We have already made plans to sack staff and put all our welfare payments to personnel online. And that's going to happen in a couple of years' time. And we made those decisions when all we saw in cyberspace were opportunities. We're now realizing the threat. We're realizing how vulnerable it is. We're realizing that when you put so many £billion a year onto the net, you are going to attract all kinds of people who want a slice of that. And so the criminal fraternity are licking their lips and rubbing their hands and just waiting. And so our government is desperately scrabbling to sort out its cybersecurity. And that's why we've put ourselves, that's why we're looking at the threat. They tasked a firm called Detica, who are now a branch of British Aerospace, or BAE rather, as they're called now. They did a survey. They reckoned that cyber crime in Britain was costing us something like £27 billion a year. That was a couple of years ago. And people reckon that's a way underestimate now. I've read some American who reckons that in America it is costing them $250 billion a year in cybercrime, loss of intellectual property, etc. This is big business, and we've got to really take it seriously. And that's why, in the Strategic Defence and Security Review that Britain undertook 2 years ago, it identified 4 top-level threats, Tier 1 threats: international terrorism, natural disaster, all-out war, and cyber. That's how seriously Britain took it, because those figures, that whole worry about the threat to our economic prosperity and our national well-being, put it right there in the top tier of threats to UK Limited, which shows how seriously Britain took it. And those, we spoke about them before, the threats out there. That deniability one's a really interesting one at the bottom. I'm not talking to a police audience. We explored this at some level when I was talking to the police on Tuesday. But that deniability aspect, not knowing who you've been attacked by, it even occurs in things like the attack I mentioned in Georgia, for instance. Actually, I'm being a bit contentious saying it was the Russians, because you can't prove it was the Russians. Equally, you can't prove that it was the Russians that took down Estonia in 2007, because to all intents and purposes, the attacks came from California. So the deniability aspect poses real questions for the law enforcement community, which is not the community I'm talking to here, but so just log that one away. And yet our government, because it is committed and because it has no reversionary mode, it says, notwithstanding the threats, the greatest threat that certainly in UK we reckon we face is that we do not make enough use of the opportunities that cyberspace presents for economic prosperity. So as a policy decision, our government has said we must crack on, we must embrace cyberspace, but we just need to learn to be safe operating there. And indeed, The Economist the other day did a survey, and they came out and they found that Britain was the fastest adopter, if you like, of cyber technology for economic growth. So the government can give itself a tick in the box. Whether we are as secure as we'd wish, we'll wait and see. So what are we going to do about it? If we have to embrace cyberspace and we want to be safe playing there. Just some ideas that I discussed yesterday with a group of people. In fact, it was the group of the banks. I'll just toss them out and then we can leave it to discussion. And these aren't particular answers. These are just thoughts. First of all, partnership. We have to embrace partnership. There is no one has a monopoly of knowledge on this. Just as I said, it was the people that are going to control the use and the development of cyberspace. So there needs to be a partnership arrangement between government, between firms, and between the population. And we need to set up networks that create that kind of communication. This was the important thing about the meeting that took place last February in London between our Prime Minister, David Cameron, and as many CEOs from big companies as people as could turn up, because it put it right there at the top level. And he was saying, we can't do this for you, you have to come and help us out on this. So that partnership is really important. And that's all about how do you build trust between the various players in cyberspace. And trust, talking yesterday with the banks about this, this is very important, this trust aspect. Secondly, The key requirement, it seems to me, for every company and indeed every individual is to prioritize your information. What knowledge do you have? What is the really vital stuff? What do I really need to secure away? And what bits do I not mind being insecure? The US Department of Defense operates a completely open, insecure system at the restricted and unrestricted level. Just accept that it's penetrated. They just live with it. Third one, how do you measure success? Well, don't go for technical standards, go for processes, because the processes can endure, whereas technology gets overtaken by events very fast. Fourth tip, go global. The odd thing about the cyber world, although it happens globally and instantaneously, actually, funny enough, viruses spread by the hours of the clock. As people turn on, as countries wake up, turn on their computers, so the virus spreads. If you can go global, it gives you 12 hours or however many hours advantage, early warning of an advancing threat. And the final one, just talk about, is my favourite. It's about cyber defence, starting with individuals. It comes back to this point about individual responsibility. If you're there in an IT security department in your company, you will recognise that your company is probably being swamped by a mass of threats and that you, with your tiny resources, can't handle it all. To handle it all, what you need is the population, and that means your workforce actually doing their bit. There's a scary statistic in Britain that says that something like 75% of people, of computers that people buy are still being used with their default password setting that they bought it with, with which they walked out of the shop. That they haven't even bothered amending the default password. That's how low a priority individuals give to cybersecurity. We've really got to change that mindset, because if we do and people get their cyber hygiene right, we can take out 80 or 90% of the threat. 80% is the GCHQ figure in London, our intelligence agency figure. They reckon 80% of the threat gets taken away. The 92% comes from Brett Arsenal, from the Chief Information Security Officer from Microsoft. Now you as IT security people, you'll recognise if you can take out 92% of the threat just by people, your workforce behaving properly, you've then got a much smaller problem that you can probably handle. You've probably got the technical knowledge to sort with. So I think that's really important. And that's really the one that I've been banging on to people about, and that governments need to take really seriously. Yellow cards are being flashed in front of me, so I'm going to stop right there and hopefully leave a bit of time for questions. Okay, thank you very much.